say I love him. I don't want to leave him like everybody else leave him. It's been eating me up. She don't deserve that. Like, she was a good person.
It was the dark hour before dawn on August 1st, 2019. Somewhere in Lithonia, Georgia, in a quiet suburban neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns and shuttered windows, a house stood silent. Inside, a woman lay dying. Upstairs, in a bedroom that had once been a sanctuary, was the aftermath of horror. A single gunshot wound to the chest and the abrupt end of a life. Moments earlier, she had made a call, one last desperate plea into the void of the night, a tremor in her voice, a warning that would echo beyond the walls. She said her name. She said the words that would haunt investigators and loved ones alike. If anything happens to me. When the first officers arrived, they encountered a scene of deceptive calm. Darkness, quiet, no signs of struggle. But the air itself felt charged, as though it had absorbed something unseen. Before they could even step through the threshold, gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the hush, striking an officer multiple times. Chaos broke loose. The wounded fell back. The gunman retreated, vanishing into the woods with the night as his accomplice. By the time reinforcements and a SWAT team re-entered the house, it was too late for the woman upstairs. She was already gone. Death had claimed her in that room of shadows and silence, leaving behind unanswered questions and grief begging to be heard. Welcome to Sinister Tales, where every whisper hides a secret and every story leaves a shadow. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of true crime and mystery, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, because some tales were never meant to be forgotten. This is the story of Aleka Simmons, a life ended by violence, a love twisted by fear, and a killer who would go to extremes to evade the law. In the coming chapters, we will explore who Aleka was, who Otis Walker was, what the red flags were, how that terrible night unfolded, how investigators pieced together the truth, how the courtroom drama played out, and how a community coped with loss. But first, we must go back. Back to before the gunshot. Back to the people who lived in the cracks of domestic tension. To understand how a promising life became just another crime statistic, we must know the lives behind the headlines. Before her name became tied to tragedy, Aleka Simmons was known for her warmth, the kind of person who carried light even into heavy rooms. Friends described her as soft-spoken, kind-hearted, and deeply loyal to the people she loved. She had grown up in Georgia, close to her family, and often spoke of wanting to build something stable, a career, a home, a life that felt safe. She was 27, still figuring things out, like so many young women trying to balance independence with love. To her loved ones, she was more than her quiet demeanor. She was resilient, someone who had learned to survive disappointment with grace. When Aleka met Otis Dennis Walker, he seemed at first like the sort of man who could give her what she'd long searched for: companionship, protection, stability. He was older, confident, and carried himself with a sense of authority that could easily be mistaken for maturity. On the surface, their relationship looked ordinary, two adults navigating the ups and downs of love. But beneath the surface, something darker brewed. Walker had a temper, and a history that would later come to light in court: prior charges of battery involving Aleka herself. To outsiders, their relationship might have seemed turbulent but survivable, the kind of couple that argued loudly, then reconciled quietly. But those close to Aleka knew there was more behind the strained smiles and temporary silences. There were stories of control, of jealousy, of moments when she seemed to shrink inside herself. She stopped going out as much. She became less open with friends. When she did talk about her relationship, her words were careful, measured, as though she was afraid of saying too much. It's the kind of story we hear too often. A woman trying to believe in love even when it starts to hurt. Aleka wasn't naive. She was hopeful. She believed that people could change, that what started as anger could be softened by patience. But Walker wasn't the kind of man who grew gentler with time. His anger simmered beneath the surface, waiting for any small spark to ignite it. In the months leading to her death, Aleka seemed caught between wanting to leave and wanting to fix things. There were moments when she confided in loved ones, moments when she tried to set boundaries, and moments when she fell silent again. The cycle so many victims of domestic abuse know too well. Behind closed doors, she was living in a state of quiet alarm, her intuition whispering warnings she tried not to hear. By the end of July 2019, the cracks were widening. Friends recalled that Aleka had grown distant. She was working, staying busy, avoiding confrontation, but her energy had changed, her laughter quieter, her eyes tired. Still, she didn't believe it would end like this. None of them did. Because even in the presence of danger, it's human to believe that love might still redeem what's broken. The night before her death, Aleka's phone became her only weapon. The lawns were mowed, porch lights glowed faintly through summer humidity, and life moved with the familiar rhythm of the suburbs. But behind one of those doors, the air had changed. Aleka had grown cautious, always aware of the man who lived beside her. Friends would later recall how she spoke less about her relationship, as though silence might keep the peace. But silence has a way of feeding the storm. There were fights, not the kind that left broken furniture, but the kind that left invisible bruises. Shouting, accusations, tension heavy enough to suffocate a room. Otis Walker had begun watching her more closely. He didn't trust her phone calls, didn't like her being away too long. He had already been arrested once for battery involving her, a charge that should have been a wake-up call. Yet somehow, he was back in her life, and the cycle began again. Apologies, promises, tears, and the illusion of normalcy. Victims often return to their abusers, not because they forget the pain, but because hope is addictive. Aleka believed, or wanted to believe, that if she just stayed quiet, if she just tried harder, he would calm down. But his behavior grew more volatile. Small disagreements became shouting matches. Neighbors would later tell police they'd heard arguing in the house, nothing they thought to report. That's the cruel reality of domestic violence. From the outside, it rarely looks like an emergency until it's too late. Then came the night of July 31st. Aleka's voice trembled through the phone lines as she reached for help, her final act of self-protection. She called 911 multiple times, her words fading between fear and resignation. On one of those calls, she said the words that would later chill the courtroom. "Are you threatening me? You're going to kill me." But the dispatcher couldn't see what was happening inside that dark house. When officers arrived, they found no noise, no movement, no open door, just stillness. They knocked, they listened, and eventually, they left. From their perspective, there was no sign of danger. From Aleka's, the danger was breathing beside her. Sometime in the hours that followed, fear became fatal. In hindsight, every missed call, every police visit, every small chance to intervene became part of the timeline investigators would later piece together. Each one felt like a door left half open, a chance to save her that slipped away. The red flags had been there. His history of violence, her growing fear, her cries for help that went unanswered. To those who loved her, it's the most haunting part of the story. Because Aleka didn't die in silence, she tried to speak. She tried to warn the world. But sometimes, warnings are heard too late. And as that night faded into morning, the house on Hodgson Corners Cove sat quiet again, a calm that was no longer peaceful, but foreboding. the kind that comes only when something terrible has already happened. The night of August 1st, 2019, began like any other in Lithonia, Georgia, the air thick with summer heat, cicadas droning, streetlights humming softly in the dark. But inside Aleka Simmons' home, a nightmare was taking shape. The house that once held laughter, arguments, and fragile peace was about to become a crime scene that would scar an entire community. At around 3 a.m., the silence shattered. Gunfire erupted from within the home, sharp, echoing bursts that ripped through the stillness of the neighborhood. Somewhere inside, Aleka was shot. The bullet tore through her chest, ending her life before she could make another call for help. Her body fell where she had once slept, her final moments spent in terror. The woman who had tried so desperately to be heard was now silent. When officers from the DeKalb County Police Department arrived, they had no idea what awaited them. They'd been called to the address before, earlier that very night, in response to her 911 calls. But when they had come then, everything had seemed calm. Now, as they approached again, they barely had time to react. As soon as they stepped toward the house, gunfire exploded from inside. Officer Derek Nunn, a seasoned patrolman, was hit multiple times, 4 rounds tearing into him before he could find cover. The sudden attack transformed a domestic disturbance into a live battlefield. Other officers scrambled for safety, returning fire as the shooter, later identified as Otis Dennis Walker, retreated deeper into the house. Walker wasn't firing wild. He knew the layout, knew where to hide. Inside that house, he unleashed at least 19 rounds, each one echoing across the quiet street, each one a message of defiance and rage. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was lashing out at the world that had come to confront him. Backup arrived. Streets were sealed off. SWAT vehicles rolled in, their lights cutting through the humid Georgia night. For hours, no one knew whether Aleka was alive. Officers surrounded the property, their weapons drawn, their hearts racing. Every sound, a creak, a breath, a gust of wind, could have been another shot. When the SWAT team finally entered, the house was heavy with the smell of gunpowder and despair. The walls were scarred with bullet holes. Furniture was overturned. And upstairs, they found her, Aleka Simmons, lifeless, lying in the same home she had tried to escape from hours before. The scene was chilling not just for its violence, but for what it represented, the devastating consequences of warnings unheeded. The 911 call that could have saved her now served as evidence of a system that reacted too late. By the time police searched the surrounding woods, Walker was gone. He had slipped away, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost. His escape triggered one of the largest manhunts in DeKalb County's recent history. Police dogs, helicopters, tactical units, all searching for a man armed, dangerous, and desperate. Days passed. Fear spread through the community. Residents were told to lock their doors, to stay vigilant. The story made headlines. A woman dead, a police officer shot, and a fugitive on the run. But Walker wasn't far. He couldn't run from what he had done, and he knew it. When police finally caught him on August 8th, a week after the shooting, he was found carrying a chilling note, a handwritten apology addressed to the officer he'd shot and the DeKalb County Police Department. It was as if, in the space between rage and regret, he'd tried to explain the unexplainable. Yet no letter could undo what he had done. Aleka was gone. Officer Nunn was left to recover from injuries that nearly took his life. And a community was left reeling from a senseless act that could have been prevented. The nightmare inside that quiet house was over, but the investigation was only beginning. Detectives would soon uncover a web of fear, control, and escalating violence that explained everything leading up to that night. And it would all point back to one man. For 8 long days, fear hung over Lithonia like a heavy fog. The streets that once echoed with the laughter of children and the hum of passing cars now carried only whispers. Whispers about a man still out there, armed, unpredictable, and capable of anything. The police presence was impossible to ignore. Patrol cars moved in slow rotations, helicopters circled overhead, and the air felt charged with unease. Everyone knew who they were looking for. Otis Dennis Walker, the man accused of killing Aleka Simmons and nearly ending the life of Officer Derek Nunn. Walker had disappeared into the woods behind the subdivision the night of the shooting. Investigators believed he'd fled on foot, using the dense tree line as cover. He knew the area well. He'd lived there, studied its shortcuts, memorized its shadows. But no one can outrun the truth forever. The DeKalb County Sheriff's Fugitive Task Force and DeKalb Police Department joined forces, combing through leads, surveillance footage, and tips from the public. They tracked every call, every possible sighting. Walker's face was everywhere, on news broadcasts, neighborhood alerts, and wanted posters. He had become a symbol of dread in a city desperate for closure. But the investigation wasn't just about finding him. It was about understanding what had led to such an explosion of violence. Detectives dug into his past and discovered what Aleka's loved ones already knew too well. This wasn't the first time he'd hurt her. Court records showed prior battery charges involving Aleka, a clear warning sign of the danger she faced. Yet, like so many cases of domestic abuse, those warnings hadn't translated into lasting protection. The system had gaps, and she had fallen through them. Inside the house, forensic investigators began reconstructing the timeline of the shooting. 19 shell casings scattered across the floors told part of the story: the panic, the rage, the chaos. The angle of the bullets suggested deliberate intent, not panic fire. Some rounds had even struck neighboring homes, a chilling reminder of how uncontrolled the violence had become. But it was what investigators found after Walker's arrest that painted the full picture
of his mindset. On August 8, 2019, police located him not far from the scene of the crime. He looked exhausted, his clothes worn, his face drawn and hollow. When they searched him, they discovered a handwritten letter folded carefully in his pocket. It was an apology addressed to Officer Nunn and to the entire DeKalb Police Department. In it, Walker tried to explain his actions, though the words offered little comfort. He wrote that he hadn't meant to harm the officer, that he was trying to provoke police into shooting him, a suicide by confrontation. But even if that was true, it didn't change what had happened. A woman was dead, an officer was critically wounded, and a community was traumatized. In the days that followed, the police department held press briefings. The sheriff's office confirmed that the suspect had been captured without further violence. Officer Nunn, though still in recovery, was alive, a testament to his resilience and the quick response of his fellow officers. Behind the scenes, the district attorney's office prepared one of the most emotionally charged prosecutions DeKalb County had seen in years. They had the physical evidence, the bullets, the casings, the weapon. They had the 911 recordings, Aleka's trembling voice captured forever. And now, they had the man himself, the one person who could answer the question everyone was asking: why? But Walker's explanation, when it finally came, would only deepen the pain. Because in his version, he wasn't a monster. He was a man pushed too far, a man acting in fear. It was a story that would clash violently with the facts and leave jurors struggling to understand the mind of a killer. The investigation had ended, but the search for justice was just beginning. The next battle would be fought not in the streets, but in the courtroom, where evidence would meet excuses and the truth would finally have its say. The courtroom in DeKalb County Superior Court was packed when the trial of Otis Dennis Walker began. Every seat filled with faces of grief, anger, and disbelief. On one side sat the family of Aleka Simmons, holding photographs and tissues, clutching one another's hands as though bracing for another blow. On the other side sat Walker, expressionless, dressed in a muted suit, his eyes cast downward, a man whose silence now carried the weight of 2 shattered lives. The charges were grave and numerous. The district attorney's office charged Walker with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, 3 counts of aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Each charge told part of the story: the murder of Aleka, the shooting of Officer Derek Nunn, and the reckless disregard for everyone else caught in the crossfire that night. As the prosecution began to lay out its case, the jury was shown the sequence of events that led to the tragedy. They listened to Aleka's final 911 call, her trembling voice cutting through the silence of the courtroom. "This is Aleka Simmons. If anything happens to me." Some jurors wiped tears. Others stared straight ahead, their faces tight with horror. The prosecutors described how officers responded, how one was gunned down before even crossing the threshold, how Walker fled after killing the woman who had once loved him. They presented the forensic evidence: 19 shell casings, the bullet trajectories, the firearm recovered, the autopsy results that confirmed Aleka had been shot at close range. Every detail, every image, every sound built a wall of truth too high to climb. But the defense had its own story. Walker's attorneys painted him not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a man trapped in a volatile relationship, one that spiraled out of control. They claimed he acted in self-defense, that Aleka had provoked him, that fear and confusion drove him to fire. They argued that when he shot at the responding officers, he wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to provoke them into killing him, a desperate act of self-destruction. It was a story that asked for pity, but the evidence left little room for doubt. The state countered each claim with hard facts: the positioning of the gun, the pattern of bullets, the testimony of experts who explained how deliberate his shots had been. The prosecutor reminded the jury that Aleka's call for help came first, not as aggression, but as fear. She had predicted her own death. That, they said, was not coincidence. It was premeditation, from him, not her. During the week-long trial, Officer Nunn testified, describing the night he was shot. His voice was steady, but his words heavy. He spoke of the darkness, the flash of the muzzle, the searing pain as bullets tore through him. His survival, he said, was a miracle. His testimony transformed the courtroom into a silent graveyard of memory, every word a reminder of what had been lost. When closing arguments began, the room felt charged with something deeper than tension. It was sorrow turned to resolve. The prosecutor's voice rose with conviction. This was not a moment of panic. This was a pattern of control that ended in murder. The defense urged mercy, claiming remorse, claiming mental collapse. The jury deliberated for hours. Outside, reporters waited under gray skies, their cameras trained on the courthouse steps. Inside, Aleka's family prayed for justice. When the jurors finally returned, their verdict was swift and unanimous: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in emotion, muffled sobs, sighs of relief, heads bowed in disbelief. Aleka's family held each other tightly. After 4 years of waiting, they finally heard the words that acknowledged her pain, her fear, her death. A few weeks later, in November 2023, Judge Yolanda Parker Smith pronounced the sentence. Her words were firm, her tone unwavering. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 65 additional years. Each year, she said, represented the magnitude of lives damaged, a punishment to fit a crime that could never be undone. Walker showed little emotion. He stared ahead, the faintest trace of regret flickering across his face. But no apology, no sentence, no courtroom speech could bring Aleka back. The law had spoken, but justice, for those who loved her, would forever feel incomplete. Outside the courthouse, the wind carried a chill through the crowd. Reporters filmed live updates, but behind the lights and microphones were faces streaked with tears: Aleka's family, her friends, and the officers who had survived that terrible night. For them, justice was both a victory and a wound. When the trial ended and the cameras faded from the courthouse steps, what remained was silence, the same heavy silence that had haunted Aleka's home that night in 2019. The world moved on, as it always does after the headlines fade, but for those who knew her, time stopped in the echo of her name. Aleka Simmons wasn't just another victim on the evening news. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and her absence left a hollow space that could never be filled. Her mother spoke quietly in interviews after the sentencing, describing the daughter she remembered, the little girl who loved to sing in church, the young woman who never left home without saying, "I love you." She wasn't the kind of person who drew attention to herself. She lived simply, loved deeply, and gave freely, until the man she trusted most turned her love into fear. That's the tragedy that lingered in every word her family spoke. Not just that she was gone, but that she knew she might be. Her 911 call wasn't just a plea, it was a prophecy. The police department mourned too. Officer Derek Nunn, who survived being shot 4 times, returned to duty months later, carrying scars both seen and unseen. At public events, he often thanked his fellow officers, the doctors who saved him, and the family who never gave up hope. But he also carried something heavier, the knowledge that one of those bullets might have ended his life, that a domestic violence call nearly cost him everything. In DeKalb County, Aleka's story became a cautionary tale whispered in training rooms and community meetings. Advocates for domestic violence survivors used her name to push for change, for more follow-ups on 911 calls, for better protection of those who report abuse, for laws that recognize the quiet danger of repeated calls that end in silence. Her death became a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous moment for a victim isn't when they leave, it's when they try to. Neighbors who once dismissed the sounds of arguing now speak differently. They remember how the police came that night, how they saw the flashing lights but never imagined the depth of what was happening inside. Some still drive by that house, the one with the porch light that used to glow so softly. It looks ordinary now, like any other home on the street. But those who know the story can't help but feel the weight of its walls, as though the house itself remembers. Aleka's friends describe her legacy not through tragedy, but through strength. They share her story with other women, women who might be in similar situations, whispering warnings that sound like echoes of her last words. If anything happens to me. They remind each other to listen, to believe, to act. Because Aleka's story, though rooted in loss, has become a voice for those who are still alive but afraid to speak. As for Walker, his life now unfolds in the cold monotony of a prison cell. No freedom, no light, only the echo of what he destroyed. He will grow old behind bars, remembered not for who he once was, but for what he chose to do. But Aleka's story isn't about him. It's about her. About every woman who senses danger but is told she's overreacting. Every friend who sees the signs but hesitates to interfere. Every call for help that ends before it's truly heard. In DeKalb County, the name Aleka Simmons is no longer just tied to a case file. It's a warning, a lesson, a ghost story told not to scare, but to awaken. And perhaps that's where her power lives now, in the way her story forces us to ask ourselves. When someone says, "If anything happens to me," do we listen? The tragedy of Aleka Simmons is not confined to a single night, a single shot, or even a single home in Lithonia. It stretches far beyond, into every overlooked warning, every missed sign, every moment when someone's fear was mistaken for exaggeration. Her story is a haunting reflection of what happens when cries for help fade into static, and when love is mistaken for loyalty in the face of danger. Aleka's final moments were filled with both terror and courage. Terror, because she knew what was coming. Courage, because she still spoke her name into that phone, trying to leave behind a record of her truth. Her voice, trembling but steady, became her final act of defiance against a man who wanted to silence her. It's that voice that echoes now, through the court records, through the halls of police training centers, through the hearts of those who still ask how it could have been prevented. After the sentencing, reporters described the courtroom emptying out slowly, as if the weight of justice itself took time to settle. Aleka's mother stayed seated for a long while, staring at the chair where her daughter's killer had sat. For her, the verdict was both a victory and a wound, one that will never truly heal. Justice had been served, yes, but justice doesn't bring back laughter. It doesn't fill an empty bedroom or silence the nightmares that follow. The system, too, carries its scars. In internal reviews, DeKalb County law enforcement revisited the events of that night. The calls, the response, the choices that might have changed the outcome. They found no malice, but they found the truth. that sometimes procedure can't see fear the way a victim feels it. That's the quiet danger of domestic violence. It hides in plain sight, right behind the smiles, the apologies, the "it's fine now" that so many victims are forced to say. Aleka's story isn't unique. It's one of thousands that unfold every year, stories of women, men, and children caught in cycles of control and silence. Yet, her name has become a symbol, a reminder that behind every 911 hang-up, behind every whisper of "I'm okay," there may be someone running out of time. In the years since her death, advocates have spoken her name at vigils and awareness walks. They hold candles against the night sky, their flames flickering in unison, each one a quiet rebellion against forgetting. Her story has become a rallying cry for intervention, for empathy, for urgency. Because if one lesson remains from what happened on August 1st, 2019, it's this: sometimes a single phone call is all the time someone has left. As the camera would fade out, imagine the street in Lithonia where it all began. The porch light that once marked Aleka's home glows faintly, cutting through the dark. A warm light in a cold silence. It stands as both a memorial and a warning that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it sits across from you at dinner. Sometimes it whispers promises it never means to keep. Aleka Simmons' story is not only about how she died. It's about how she lived, with hope, with love, with the belief that people could change. It's about how the system failed to see her fear and how her voice, even in its final moments, refused to be erased. And as her story closes, one question lingers like a pulse in the dark. How many more Alekas must there be before we start listening the first time someone says, "I'm scared"? If this story moved you, if you believe no one's final words should ever go unheard, help us spread awareness. Like, share, and subscribe to Sinister Tales, where we uncover the stories that remind us how thin the line is between love and danger, and how silence can be the loudest warning of all.